Welcome. My name is Shannon Brooks, and it's a pleasure for me to be with you. I've been mentored by some very incredible people in my life. Mr. William H. Doty, who was a friend and financial guru to the filmmaker Walt Disney. Vicki Jo Anderson, who is an author of the great book called A History Reborn. And of course, Dr. Oliver DeMille, who is not only the author of A Thomas Jefferson Education, but who is also the founder of George Wythe College. Probably the most influential mentor that I've had is a man by the name of Dr. W. Cleon Skousen. Dr. Skousen, of course, was the founder of the National Center for Constitutional Studies, but was also the author of over 30 books and a nationally known speaker. A couple of his books you might recognize: The Making of America, and of course one that has been heavily endorsed by Glenn Beck himself, and that is The 5,000-Year Leap. During the last 15 years of his life, Dr. Skousen mentored us over and over again, and he kept teaching the same concept over and over as if he was afraid that we were going to miss the point. And that is, he taught that education is the key to freedom. I think he meant two things when he said that. One was that it's important to have a good education, take care of your family. But two, he was making the point over and over that if we're going to have a free nation, and we're going to perpetuate the freedom that our founders gave us, many, many more Americans need to have the kind of education that the founders had. Historically, many groups have desired to have freedom. They fought against tyranny. They just wanted a better life. From Spartacus to William Wallace to the French in the late 1700s to the Hungarian Revolution in 1956. All of these groups desired to have freedom, but they all had one thing in common. They did not have a freedom-educated electorate or citizenry. Without that, the freedom fight ends up being a futile effort against tyranny and usually ends up in even less freedom than they had before. In the few minutes that I've got with you today, I'd like to take a minute and go over some of the elements of freedom education. This is the education of Washington and Jefferson and Adams, Hamilton, Madison, Monroe, and you name it. A huge number of leaders during the founding generation, and many of the founders themselves, or many of the citizens themselves at that time. This type of education gave the American founders and the general populace at the time the ability, the insight, the fortitude to not only beat the British militarily and politically, but also gave them the savvy and wisdom to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and to ensure the blessings of liberty for themselves and for their posterity for more than 230 years. In America, there are three primary educational influences: what we call the Prussian model of education, the Latin model, and the Oxford model of education. Let me go through each one of these with you very quickly. The Prussian model of education has been around for millennia and has typically been used as a method of governmental control and indoctrination. It is simply a system of education that employs a set curriculum, rote memorization, mandatory attendance, a very controlled environment, and universal grading and testing. It is almost always a state-run program and generally finds no use for parents in the education of children. Now, the Latin model of education finds its origin in the dominance of Rome following the fall of Carthage in 218 BC. This system of education identifies strongly with the idea of credentialism or Mandaриnism. It also has the distinct characteristic of being, in-depth studies in very narrow fields. It carries with it a strong feeling of superiority and entitlement over the masses. It sort of perpetuates the idea of privileged information and training for the privileged few. This system has been employed for centuries to perpetuate and maintain this sense of social and financial elitism. The Oxford model of education can be traced back to its origins informally back as far back as Thales in 700 BC and perhaps even farther back. A more proper genealogy of the Oxford model would be the 10th century schoolmen of Europe, who eventually set up a legacy of education in Oxford, England. This foundation, this educational foundation, led to British supremacy for over 400 years and also led to the seedbed of American education, which produced the likes of the founding generation. But more importantly is that this American Oxford system of education created generation after generation after generation for over 350 years men and women in a general populace who could read and who could write, who could think, who could solve most of their problems by themselves and did not need government intervention. This was the legacy of the American educational system. Sad to say that is not the state of affairs for the American public today. It appears that we have devolved from a strong, proud, self-sufficient, ingenious people who could take care of themselves, to a population that believes that the government should do everything for us. We have become a people who no longer know who we are or of what we are capable. The founding generation reached very high levels of achievement because of the educational system that they had. It used to be the way that all Americans were educated. It is the only educational process that will give you and me the knowledge, the wisdom, and the power to set right our political ship of state, revive our sense of American dignity and self-sufficiency, and allow us to promote and perpetuate the legacy of Americanism for future generations. This set of books behind me is the great books of the Western world, compiled and made available in the early 1950s by two men, Mortimer Adler and Robert Hutchins of the University of Chicago. It encapsulates virtually 3,000 years of Western thought. And it is the closest that pretty much any of us are ever going to get to study what the founders studied. I believe that this body of information and knowledge and the subsequent wisdom and strength of character comes from the study of these volumes is what we need to give us the edge and give us the foundation to lead rightly in the 21st century. As I've traveled around the United States, I see a very strong movement of patriots and concerned citizens speaking out against injustice, government encroachment, corrupt and fraudulent politics, ever-rising taxes, absurd domestic and foreign policies, excessive government spending, hostile legislation, and strong-arm political tactics. The list goes on. I see legitimate anger and frustration. I see a call for change. I see a call for better governance. What I don't see are well thought out solutions with long-term implementation. A good friend of mine, Steve Palmer, he's a freelance writer and a New York Times bestselling author, had this to say about this issue. And I quote, "I'm fed up at the Federal Reserve, but I also don't have a complete grasp on how our monetary system should operate in the 21st century, nor do I have a solid plan for making the transition. So I don't march on Washington to spit at the Federal Reserve. I stay at home and read everything I can find on monetary policy. I'm sick and tired of weaseling, compromising, ignorant, and money and power-grubbing politicians. So I prepare myself to be a political leader with integrity, knowledge, and wisdom. I'm dismayed by the decay of the family, but I'm further dismayed by the times when I'm angry and impatient with my own wife and children. So I focus my dismay on doing all I can to become a better husband and father. And when you see me march on Washington, it won't be because I'm angry as hell and I'm not going to take it anymore. It'll be because I actually have real, sustainable solutions and the ability to carry them out. Until then, I'm working on improving myself. Care to join me? The long-term solution for this American crisis is each one of us getting a strong liberal arts education of the caliber of Jefferson and Adams, just like the Founding Fathers. In fact, what we need now is a new generation of Founding Fathers and Founding Mothers. I challenge you to be those founders. I challenge you to take the time, Put in the effort to get a liberal arts education just like the founding generation. I challenge you to be better mothers and fathers, better husbands and wives. It was Aristotle who was attributed with this saying, "No man will or can govern society better than he governs his own house." You are the single best chance for the next 3 generations of Americans. I hope and pray that we all take this challenge seriously, that we take our stewardship seriously, and that we fulfill our responsibilities for the next 3 to 5 generations. Thank you.